Restricted general fund revenue is about 131 million, of which 47.9 is the contributions from unrestricted. Now you might have noticed that number is different than you saw on the unrestricted side. On the unrestricted side, so that we don't have negative pi, which doesn't work in the pie charts, we offset the amount of indirect costs that come back, whereas on the restricted side that shows up in the expenditures so that you can see it in its full glory. But 131.5 million breaks up to be about 36% is the contribution from the unrestricted side, and roughly half is our federal and state categorical money. We also have some local restricted money that's accounted for on the restricted side, and the restricted revenue limit is the revenue limit generated by our special education and community day students. On the restricted side, again, primarily salaries and benefits are our main costs. We do have more services and other operating expenditures on the restricted side than we do on the unrestricted side for various services that are paid for both in special education, transportation, and in routine restricted maintenance. All those things that are done by outside contractors that we don't do here locally are all incorporated in that account, as well as the restricted side of any utility expenses for other programs. So all in all, still well more than 60% of the restricted side is, about 2/3 of our budget is people on the restricted side. The restricted general fund's projecting an expenditure of about 5.6 of its opening balance. Now, in reality, when we get to the end of the year, both revenues and expenditures will be lower than the numbers that you see here. Because the one thing that we don't account for is trying to project out what doesn't get spent in grants that are deferred revenue grants. Because when a grant is a deferred revenue grant, if it isn't fully expended in the current year, rather than showing a fund balance at the end, we actually have to reduce the current year revenue and book it as a deferred revenue or a liability into the next year, and then it's reversed. So both the revenue and the expenditures will be lower than the numbers you see here, but the net should be about where we expect the categoricals that actually carry fund balances to go. The remainder of the big green book are all the other funds of the district, all of which are still projecting to end the year positive, as they were at second interim, so that is not a change. And then the supplemental information, you'll notice in third interim there's less supplemental information because there are less reports that are required to go to the county. They still keep up with our attendance, which is actually better than it was at second interim. They still keep up with our cash flow, and while our ending cash is still positive, we are spending cash down quite a bit. So the state deferrals are not helping us out. Our cash balance is projected to end between 8 and 9 million. We started with $25 million in cash at the beginning of the year this year. So for our ending fund balance to be where we're projecting it to be, but cash to only be at 9 million, means we have a huge amount of accounts receivable, the vast majority of which is receivables from the state of California in the form of the deferrals of the revenue limit, special education funding, and certain other categorical funding that's been deferred into the new year. The revenue limit calculations are also included. In the multi-year projection, which is where we're going to go next, one of the bigger changes in the multi-year projection is the effect of Clayton Valley. At this point, because the State Board of Education has not yet ruled on our waiver request, we are still incorporating the revenue limit decrease at its full amount. We are still very hopeful that that will go in our favor and that we will be able to adjust that slightly so that we're not taking that full ramification of the $3.7 million piece of the hit. What we also don't know yet is how everything will shake out with regard to the contribution to special education and which special education students will end up being served where. And so those numbers are still a little bit in flux. But at this point, we're trying to run a fairly conservative road on this because we don't want to have a negative surprise mid-year next year. So with regard to the multi-year projection, assuming that the governor gets his way and that his projections pass and that he holds to what he has said education funding will be, in our current 3-year projection, we will end the third year positive. We will have an unappropriated ending balance, or that's an amount above our 2% reserve, of about $5.3 million. However, if they fail, then we have about $2.9 million of additional work to do with regard to making sure that we can jump over the June 2014 hurdle. Additionally, you'll notice that we have operating deficits in 12-13 and 13-14, and those project forward of about $15 million a year. So with the taxes passing, that number is between $10 and $11 million a year. If it fails, it's closer to 15. And so we have a lot of work to do because we can't sustain our current spending level into 14-15 school year, which we will have to address when we get to budget adoption. So if we had to do a certification, we would be positive as of right